All right, guys. So we can't do radars because it's really hard to read a teleprompter off of a screen. So I thought we'd just pick some topics and we would kick them around. And something we've been thinking a lot here, Crystal and I, is about the possibility of Trumpism, the Republican Party, which I do believe is very much on the verge of breaking apart, going the way of the Whigs, and a complete split within their coalition. But something that has been challenging my theses on this are a couple interesting new pieces. So let's throw the first one up here on the screen. It's about Trumpism is here to stay. It's from a researcher named Eric Kaufman. And Crystal, what was really fascinating to me is that Eric did polls amongst some Trump supporters, three different categories. One was that the election was stolen. So within them, they support Trump 2024 as the nominee at 47%. But then slight majority, 49% say a respectful Trumpist candidate would be somebody that they would support for the 2024 nominee. The next category, which is Biden won and there was, quote, some irregularities, is 8% say Trump would be their nominee, and 68% say that a respectful Trumpist candidate would be who they support for the 2024. And then the final category, which is Biden won, 12% say Trump 2024, 53% say a respectful Trumpist candidate. And that is also the area where a quote unquote respectful neoconservative candidate would get the most amount of support at 35%. But what's really interesting there, the slight majority in all three cases is a quote unquote respectful Trumpist candidate, which seems to me, this is really interesting because I've long actually thought there is no such thing as Trumpism without Trump, is that if you take that Trump type policy agenda and you pair it up, not with a phony politician or a normal politician, but with somebody who is just not as personally odious as Trump, then you could actually win an election. It's the first time I've seen any data to back up that thesis. But like I said, I still think the much more likely scenario is that Trump is around and that the QAnon wing splits off, and then the Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney wing also splits off. And then in 10 years, you basically just have this permanent minority coalition of around 35 or 40%. But I'm curious what you think.
Well, I guess my question is, what do you think people mean by respectful Trumpist candidate? Because it's not clear to me at this point that actually is about policy versus sort of affect. They like that he's, that he's aggressive towards the media and that he's nasty towards their enemies, but they want him to reel it in so it's not quite as off the rails. I mean, to me, that's that sort of sense of grievance, which in a lot of cases is sort of justified based on how a lot of American people have been treated. But that sense of grievance to me is more the core of Trumpism at this point, to the extent that there is any Trumpism than any real policy directive. So I'm not sure when people are looking at that they're going, oh yeah, I want a politician who has the trade policy of Trump, who has the immigration policy of Trump, who has the heterodox economic views that he had in 2016, given the fact that he governed sort of an ordinary Orthodox Republican. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think you're 100% right. And here's what I think if I were to try and explain this is the way I would look at it, is they want him to still drive, they want somebody who will still drive the right people crazy, as in still will drive the media crazy, still will drive, the elites in the country crazy, still will piss off Ivy League educated liberals, etc., but doesn't call Stormy Daniels horseface. But doesn't, interject his own personal petty beefs into something which isn't part of a broader grievance reflected on behalf of people who have been forgotten. And I think, Michael Brendan Doherty is somebody I really respect over at National Review. He just wrote this piece here about Trumpism after Trump. And he opens with the same supposition that I said, which is I don't think Trumpism without Trump is really possible. But what is going to live beyond him? And this is, if there's a central thesis to the show, it's this, which is that you're not going to take away the reasons that Trump got elected. As in, you are not going to take away hatred towards the American elite. You are not going to take away grievances around the way our economy is structured, or income inequality, or a sense that the country is completely and irrevocably changing without taking care of you or valuing many of the things that you value within your family and within your life. I think those things are more important than ever to understand are permanent parts of our political life going forward. And I've been really troubled in the last couple of days. I've been watching, I was watching with great interest around how the conservative intelligentsia and all of this would react to not just the impeachment discussion, but kind of the their Trump reflections. And it seems to me they all just want to hit the reset button. They're like, no, I literally saw someone over at the Dispatch, which is like, never Trump rag, being like, we're just going to say, oh, it's going to be like new phone, who dis, like totally. They literally said that about forgetting who Trump was. And I'm like, are you people out of your minds? I mean, look at that data, at least in what I said, the sense of grievance within the Republican base is there. And I see a near universality of people who are conservative intellectuals who want Trump impeached and think it's the right thing to do. And then only 10 Republicans in the House of Representatives even vote to impeach Trump. Liz Cheney just got censured by every single Republican vote in Wyoming, a Wyoming Republican Party. And she's going to get primary, and there's no way she's going to be serving in the House of Representatives 3 years from now. So I just think that the disconnect between the Republican elites, the intelligentsia, and the reason Trump is even here in the first place, it's like we're right back to where we started, and the grievances are always going to be there within our populace. And how we address that, I just have no idea. But increasingly, don't think Joe Biden, is going to be the one who's going to try to do it.
I think Max Alvarez said it really well on our show, that the thing that Trump promised to the base and that he really ultimately delivered on was cultural power and relevance.
Yes.
This was a group of people who felt like they'd been pushed down in polite society and shunned and looked down upon, and obviously had the economic lifeblood also stripped down of their towns. And so Trump made them relevant again, put them and their concerns front and center, right? And that didn't really translate into concrete policy actions, but there was at least a sense of like, oh, I matter again in this country. My guy's in the White House. I have some kind of power here. To me, that's kind of the core of what Trump and what Trumpism ultimately came to mean among his base. Where does it go from here? I mean, the most the most seismic shift that we've seen since the insurrection at the Capitol is that business in a lot of ways really is cutting their ties with the Republican Party. They really are saying, look, we're done here. This is bad for our bottom line. We don't want to have anything to do with this. And if you strip out that elite support for the Republican Party, you're left with a pretty pathetic state of affairs, frankly. I mean, you're left with really a minority faction who will do well in certain geographic regions, but not be a national force. So you either, and I think that's probably the most likely direction, because if you look at the polling, most Republicans say, hey, the election was stolen. Most Republicans say, hey, I'm more of a Trump person than a Republican person anyway. So if you had to guess what direction it's going in, that probably is what the Republican Party turns into. And then even more of the elites move over to, like, they don't have to start their own party. They've got the Democratic Party at their beck and call. They've already got a place to land. So ultimately, does either party end up as like a working class party? No, you end up with two parties, with the working class continuing to be divided and a bizarre and truly actually frightening elite concentration within one of the parties that it's been a long time since we've seen. And the implications of that are troubling, let's just say.
Yeah, I think it's very dire. And I agree with you. The permanent minority route is very likely. If there were to ever be a solution, it could possibly be within that data, but there's nobody smart enough or with the political chops on the scene right now in order to exploit that. But we'll see. And I think it's very worthy of discussion. I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about next.